Could I please ask those members who are leaving the chamber to do so quickly and quietly, as we are just about to move on to the final item of business. And the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 20387 in the name of Liam MacArthur on the Future Farming Investment Scheme. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would invite those members who would wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak button, and I call on Liam MacArthur to open the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I know we're in unusual territory here, having a members' debate on a Thursday evening. Normally it's a time where it's only us islanders who are still kicking around, marooned in Edinburgh as a result of the last flight home, having long since departed. So I'm all the more grateful to hardy colleagues from all other parts of mainland Scotland for sticking around at the end of another very busy week to take part in this debate, and grateful to all those who signed my motion to allow the debate to take place. In some senses, the horse has perhaps bolted when it comes to the future farming investment scheme. Towards the end of last year, like colleagues from across parties across the chamber, I had and took various opportunities to raise serious and I think entirely legitimate concerns about the way in which FFIS process had been developed, executed and communicated. Even so, despite all the oral and written questions, FOI responses and meetings and correspondence with the Minister, I still think there's a need for Parliament to be able to actually debate what went wrong and how this can be avoided in future. I don't think there can be any doubt, given what we know, and we still don't know everything, I think it's fair to say, but there is no doubt this scheme was rushed in its development, poorly communicated and resulted in widespread anger and confusion amongst farmers and crofters across Scotland. Yes, it's true to say that demand was always likely to exceed the available funding. SLE estimate that only around 30% of eligible businesses were likely to be successful. It's also true to say in such circumstances, we're always more likely to hear from those who have missed out rather than from those who have secured funding. Even so, measured against the stated intentions ministers set for the scheme, it's hard, I would say indeed impossible, to sustain an argument that FFIS did what it said on the tin and will make a meaningful difference in achieving its intended objectives. I'll take a yes.
Minister.
Member, on that last point, the stated intention was not specifically about young farmers, islanders and new entrants. It was about the specific policy intent which was set out in the briefing, and we have achieved that with the limited pot of money that we've put into this discretionary scheme. Would the member not accept that?
Liam MacArthur.
I thank the Minister for the intervention. I'm not sure I do accept that, and to some extent time will tell, given the nature of the objectives of the scheme. But I think there is clear evidence that not only from those that didn't achieve successful applications, but even from some that did, it's difficult to see how objectives will be met. The Minister may argue that his funding is now circulating within the sector, and again that's certainly true. But at a time when finances are tight and the challenges facing the farming sector feel particularly acute, misdirection or poorly targeted support is something that farmers, crofters and indeed the country as a whole can ill afford. I'm sure we'll hear shortly about examples from other parts of the country, but in an Orkney context, the experience of FFIS reflects a wider failure of government policy to fully recognise the needs and circumstances of those farming in island communities. That was not the initial reaction to this scheme, which appeared to prioritise island farm businesses along with young farmers and the tenanted sector, all of whom I'd suggest face specific challenges. And the objective of improving sustainability and environmental efficiency is one that farmers in my own constituency support, are already pursuing and are willing to go further in doing so. Indeed, the high level of demand for this scheme demonstrates the appetite not just in Orkney but across the country for making greater and faster progress in that transition. So, while maybe not a universal view, the general feeling was that FFIS could make an important difference. When the award announcements were made at the end of last year, however, the disappointment was only exceeded by the astonishment and confusion felt by those who, with good reason, felt that they met most, if not all, of the key criteria. I know I wasn't alone in seeing my inbox fill up over a short space of time with constituents bemused at having had their applications rejected with no explanation as to why. The failure of communication simply intensified the level of anger felt. Orkney-based businesses received less than 3.5% of the overall funding allocated. In Shetland, the figure was less than 2%. By way of example, I was contacted by a farm business in one of the smaller North Isles in Orkney, which worked with the Orkney College to prepare an application for livestock management equipment to improve the efficiency and sustainability of the farm, which is already signed up to 2 agri-environmental schemes. In other words, this was a business entirely aligned with the stated objectives of improving climate efficiency, yet the application was flatly rejected. As my constituent said, the results of the scheme belie its claim that it was targeting small islands. In the end, the whole application process turned out to be a waste of time and money for a small farm already facing a lot of other challenges. This, I think, sums up the problem with the scheme. It's a scheme devised in haste for political reasons to allow announcements to be made at the Highland Show, which raised expectations, wasted time and the resources of farm businesses and won't actually achieve its stated aims. The Minister surely must now acknowledge that fact, and the government need to learn lessons. And I can suggest that a chance to demonstrate lessons have been learned can be found in the future greening proposals. As the Minister will know, and have heard again last week from my constituents Douglas Patterson and William Harvey, ramping up EFA obligations from 5% of land managed to 7% will have serious consequences in an Orkney setting. The SRUC report on greening in Orkney, published last year, confirmed that 35% of Orkney farms are already in receipt of funding for agri-environment schemes, the highest proportion by some margin anywhere in the country. The same report emphasised the clear policy overlap between these and EFA objectives and recommended better coordination between the two to avoid duplication. Farmers are clear that the new greening options don't reflect what works for island farms, a concern supported by SRUC. Many of the measures are simply not compatible with Orkney's grassland systems, and increased vulnerability to weather heightens the risk of costs involved for small businesses being wasted. Spending money on measures that won't work may give the illusion of progress, but will do nothing for the environment while threatening the viability of farm businesses and prompting a reduction in the Orkney herd. SRUC's 2024 report on agriculture in Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles confirmed that it represents a larger share of economic activity than in mainland communities. At the same time, there are critical constraints from higher haulage costs to a shrinking workforce. So a thriving agricultural sector is critical for our island economies, but also play a profound cultural and social role too. That means that agricultural funding and support, whether through competitive schemes like FFIS or statutory requirements such as EFAs, must take account the direct consequences and circumstances of island farming and recognise its unique importance to those communities. That was the reassurance I got from the Cabinet Secretary when I raised this issue in the Chamber back in June 2024. It's the commitment I'm seeking now from the Minister today. Look forward to his comments as well as the contributions from all other colleagues in the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 4 minutes. I call Christine Graham to be followed by Douglas Ross. Ms Graham.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the member for bringing this debate on the Future Farming Investment Scheme, and I defer certainly to members in this chamber who, in this context, have much more in-depth knowledge of the sector than myself, though I would add that I have not had one email from farms in my constituency on this issue, though I hope, and I probably will have some after this contribution. Post-Brexit, other funding mechanisms have had to be established for the agricultural sector, accept that. And in that context, I move to FFIS for short, that capital grant scheme for farmers, crofters, opening up 100% funding for equipment like handling systems, feed trailers and so on. It was a competitive scheme, prioritising new entrants, young farmers and small and tenant farms with applications generally via the Rural Payments Portal. And I'll go through some statistics. It opened for applications on 14th July 2025, closing on 22nd August that year. The indicative budget allocation started at 14 million, but increased to over 21 million because of high demand. 7,852 applications were received, and after sifting for eligibility and verification, 4,462 met the criteria for assessment. And of these, 1,794 applications were ultimately prioritised and offered a grant. Overall, around 42% of applications did not pass one or more eligibility or verification checks. I also checked on the Government's website, detailing information on applying to the scheme, on guidance on how to apply. That 42% figure does not distinguish between failing eligibility and or verification. So separating that data would be helpful in determining whether that guidance needs to be revised. By the way, I note that... Oh, golly, something's happened here, sorry. By the way, I note from an FO answer that AI was not used to determine eligibility, and I thank Liam MacArthur for advising it has a different connotation in the farming community. Mustn't get them muddled. Because of that high demand and disappointment, there was quite naturally that, for those rejected, a sense, and it may be right, I don't know, that allocations may not have been fair. I therefore found the Minister's answer 4th December to Liam MacArthur's question in this regard most helpful, and I'll quote briefly, given the time. Quote, regarding the allocation of funding to island-based businesses, priority status alone did not guarantee funding. Investments also had to demonstrate strong alignment with scheme objectives and deliver measurable outcomes. And, in more quotes, many applicants from priority groups applied for standard items of agricultural equipment, mainly for general livestock management, which, while not deemed ineligible when assessed against other capital investments, did not demonstrate strong delivery against the scheme's objectives. There then followed a detailed list of items supported and the cost to the fund. What is missing, and perhaps the Minister will provide an explanation, I may have missed this, is a breakdown, say, by parliamentary region, more detailed data such as new entrants, farm type and so on, for successful and unsuccessful applications. Indeed, I don't think that would breach data protection if it was broken down to actual farms. It may be there. I haven't been able to find it. Yes, certainly.
Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful to Christine Graham for giving way. If the Minister doesn't commit to that tonight, and I think she's making a very sensible suggestion, will she support my amendment to the Natural Environment Bill that seeks to do exactly that?
Christine Graham.
Well, I say to the member, I have to be honest, I haven't even looked at the amendment, so I can't give any answer to that just now, but I'll be interested in it. So what I want to say is this. We all know demand with any grant scheme is likely to be underestimated, but that demand underlines that this is actually an excellent initiative. I accept that budgets are constrained, that this is only one funding mechanism for our farming community. I hope it's being reviewed because this initiative was bound to have teething problems. It's not an excuse, but most initiatives in my lifetime generally do. So I'm looking for more clarity, more data breakdown, and a look at the guidance, which seems to have taken a lot of people out of having a proper application at the beginning. So perhaps that needs to be done. Also, what I think is requires an assessment of the benefits to the farmer crop, and I know that there will be an audit, to confirm if the criteria needs tweaked, because it's public money, to see if it's well spent in the very, very worthwhile objective of supporting in particular new entrants, small farms and crofts, so essential to Scotland's domestic and export needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I call Douglas Ross to be followed by Mercedes Viaba. Mr Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I congratulate Liam MacArthur on securing this debate, but the work he's done on this issue since concerns arose about the FFIS. I agreed with almost everything he said, bar one point, when he said we normally just hear from those who have been unsuccessful. That's normally the case. Ironically, with this, I've heard from a number of people that couldn't believe they were successful. They were actually quite shocked that their application was successful when others, and they'd read about the problems, commented that they had not been successful. I'll give way to Liam MacArthur.
Liam MacArthur.
I think the point that Douglas Ross makes is entirely valid, and therefore, for the purposes of amending the record, can I say that I've also heard for those that fall into a similar category. But I think it is still true to say that normally one hears from those who have lost out rather than those that have gained.
Dr Ross.
No, I think that's entirely fair, and I've certainly heard from a lot of people who've lost out in this case, but as I say, others who have been surprised at their success. And I want to say this is a scheme that we are supportive of. I want to see money going out to our farmers, to our crofters, to our tenant farmers, to young farmers, new entrants. But something has gone wrong here. I think the figure of ineligible applications is 47%. When you have a scheme that is attracting 7,584 applications, and almost half of them are thrown out before they're even considered because they're deemed ineligible, something has gone wrong. And that's why I asked the Minister in a general question a couple of months ago, did he raise concerns about this at the time? When his officials came in and said, we've had this number of applications, this number successful, this number unsuccessful, oh, and by the way, half of them we couldn't even consider because they were ineligible. I do think that raises serious concerns, Minister, that should be at the very top of your list looking into this, because something must be corrected for future schemes if that many are going to be ineligible.
Christine Graham.
I think the member would hear that I said perhaps it's not the only thing. We have to look at the guidance, because part of that may be the guidance was not robust, didn't have the clarity. We shouldn't have that amount of failure. You may predict there's other reasons for it, but I think that's certainly something to be looked at.
Douglas Ross.
I do agree with that, but actually the Minister's given us the reasons why these were applications were ineligible, and when I sent those reasons to constituents, they were very confused by that. For example, wrong numbers that were actually automatically inputted onto the system should not then have caused that application to be deemed ineligible. I don't have a lot of time, but I do want to stress to the Minister and any who are watching this debate, perhaps remotely or looking back in the official record. Liam MacArthur's right to say we're kind of looking at this after the horses bolted the stable. But there is still an opportunity on Tuesday. I brought forward an amendment at stage 2 to the Natural Environment Bill to get the very information that Christine Graham is looking for. We do need a breakdown, so people can see where they went wrong, if it was their fault that they didn't meet the criteria, they were ineligible, etc., and get that feedback. At the time, it was voted down by SNP and Green members on the committee. I'm taking it back for the whole chamber to consider this, but I do believe it was voted down partly because, as Liam MacArthur puts in his motion, we were promised a review by the Cabinet Secretary at the time. That review is certainly not answering the questions I have and my constituents have, and therefore I will be going forward with my amendment on Tuesday to compel the government to provide this information, because people are looking for it. They are concerned about the amounts of money that were spent in this scheme, the hope that many of them had to secure that funding, and while they accept that not everyone can be successful, they are struggling to accept the reasons behind their claim not being successful when they see so many people have missed out on opportunities for a scheme that was supposed to help them. So I hope the Minister will consider urging SNP members to support those amendments next week. And finally, Presiding Officer, we do have to look at the numbers involved in judging these applications. We are told categorically no AI was used in terms of looking at these applications. But we know, as Scottish Conservatives, from a Freedom of Information request, there were only 6 core staff looking at these applications, aided by perhaps another 6 support staff. They looked at them over a month. That works out at about 10 minutes per application. I'm not sure that we can really guarantee that only humans looked at these applications if they're only spending 10 minutes on them. So a lot of questions still remain. I hope we get some answers from the Minister in summing up. And as I say, I'll be coming back to this issue again on Tuesday. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Ross. I now call Mercedes Vialba, who's joining us remotely, to be followed by Jamie Halker-Johnson. Ms Vialba.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to take part remotely this evening. I congratulate Liam MacArthur for securing cross-party support for his motion and bringing this debate to the Chamber. And I'd like to begin my contribution for Labour by paying tribute to the thousands of land workers, crofters and farmers, both in the North East region and across Scotland, who already do an immense amount to put food on our tables and care for our natural environment and biodiversity. And let's remember what the stated objectives of the Future Farming Investment Scheme actually were: to improve sustainability, to restore and enhance the environment, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and to mitigate the effects of climate breakdown. And so in that context, it is hard to understand why the vast amount of the scheme has been allowed to go to big agricultural landowners and mega farms, or why the majority of the fund is going to parts of Scotland where land is favourable, with only a fraction going to less favourable areas. It means the scheme is looking increasingly like a missed opportunity to rethinking where our farming funding should be going. In contrast, Scottish Labour believe that more should be going to smallholders, crofters, land workers, regenerative farmers, and to supporting small and local businesses. I'll take the Minister's intervention.
Minister.
I'd like to thank Mercedes Valhalva for taking that intervention. The point that the member has just made about big landholders, we should not recognise that those big landholders in those arable places have got every bit as much to add to our biodiversity targets, the other targets that were part of the scheme. They've got as much to add, if not more, given the scale that they're working on, and that's vitally important to make sure Scotland is a leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture.
Mercedes Vialba.
Thank the Minister for his intervention, but as today's motion points out, in theory, this scheme was targeted towards islanders, new entrants, young farmers and tenant farmers, but in practice it's failed to deliver for small farmers. In some areas, 93.9% of applicants are rejected in the first place as irregular without so much as an assessment. For Inverurie and District in the North East, less than 28% of initial applicants received anything at all. So clearly something has gone very wrong with this scheme. Now, look, today's debate isn't about what geographical region is most deserving of the funding, and it isn't about litigating failures of the scheme for the sake of it. What the motion is calling for, quite reasonably, and which Labour supports, is for the Scottish Government to publish its review on the Future Farming Investment Scheme and provide further clarity on how the funding for the scheme was allocated. Because as things stand, the mishandling of this scheme appears systematic rather than simply teething problems, as one member has described them. Systematic of the SNP's approach to rural and island farming communities across Scotland, an approach where the SNP government appears to be content to let big agribusiness reign at the expense of small island and young entrants. Now, the SNP have so far failed to support crofters and small producers in rural communities, and the millions given to big agriculture through the Future Farming Investment Scheme is only the latest in a long line of botched farming policy from the SNP, which repeatedly seeks to give financial handouts to large-scale industrial agriculture at the expense of smallholders and crofters. Just recently, under proposals on fruit and veg, the Minister for Agriculture wanted to limit funding to just 3 producers, which would have excluded small growers and crofters. But look, there is still time to change course. We must make the Future Farming Investment Scheme fit for purpose to be fit for the future. Now, clearly, this is possible, but the Scottish Government can and should go further. It could investigate the problems with the 3-hectare minimum threshold for agricultural subsidies so that all active land workers can make a decent living, regardless of scale, and help boost homegrown, short supply chain food security, because by prioritising nature-friendly and regenerative farming, the agriculture sector can lead the way in mainstreaming environment and biodiversity action. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Vialba. I now call Jamie Halker-Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I remind the Chamber of my register of interest as a partner in a farming business and an applicant to the Future Farming Investment Scheme? Can I firstly congratulate Liam MacArthur for bringing the motion to the Chamber today and providing members with another opportunity to raise concerns over what is a real issue for many farmers and crofters in our communities. The Future Farming Investment Scheme promised so much to those communities. Unfortunately, as we've already heard today, and in the many times this has been raised in this chamber by myself and colleagues like Douglas Ross and Tim Eagle and others across the chamber, its development and its implementation were flawed. Those flaws, which I'm sure the Scottish ministers would prefer to call challenges or perhaps teething problems, were baked in from the very start because, as is far too often the case, the Scottish Government failed to consult properly and to listen to the concerns of those who know best, our farmers and our crofters. Since those rejection emails started hitting boxes, including, as I've said before, our own in Orkney, we've tried to get the answers individual businesses and our agricultural sector more widely have sought thought. The most simple being, on what basis were applications rejected? And we need to know because we need to know how to apply better when the next scheme comes about. Those of us in the farming community know that farming throws many variables. Harvest fails, livestock die or are injured, fuel and other costs go up. We recognise that. And some of the challenges we face, the family farm tax and increases in national insurance contributions, to name just 2, are beyond the control of this Parliament. But the truth is that Scottish ministers do have a great deal of power to change things for the better. And in this case, the Scottish Government fell short. As I mentioned previously, my colleagues and I on these benches have tried to get the answer the sector wants us to get. As Douglas Roth mentioned, both he and I have tried to bring transparency to the FFIS through legislative amendments. The SNP and others have combined to vote them down. But we are bringing back those amendments and others on the subject at Stage 3 of the Natural Environment Bill next week, and I urge all parties, certainly all those who will want to stand up for our farmers and crofters, to support them. And only yesterday at Rural Questions I asked the Minister, I tried to ask the Minister, to what extent the process was automated. I didn't get a clear answer, so I'll ask the Minister again today, and I'm happy to take an intervention if he's happy to give one. Although the Minister stated that artificial intelligence was not used in the verification and eligibility process, we know that an Excel-based programme was used. So could applications be deemed ineligible and therefore not progressed to the formal assessment stage, having had no human assessment whatsoever? I'm happy to take an intervention from the Minister. You had your answer yesterday. I didn't have an answer yesterday, which is why I was bringing it back again today. I'm disappointed the Minister won't answer that, because it's one of the concerns of our farmers and crofters, not just in this instance. Their applications have been rejected solely by a computer programme, but the same might happen again in the future, and we do want clarification on that. I don't doubt that the FFIS was conceived with good intentions, and we know that a great many farm businesses expressed an interest. But the volume of rejections and the lack of any transparency on why applications were rejected has left a legacy of resentment, anger and frustration in our rural communities. The Cabinet Secretary previously said that the FFIS is a powerful example of what can be achieved when we come together. I'm not sure that the sector feels at all that they are working together with the Scottish Government on this. And for many farmers and crofters, it's yet another example of what happens when ministers and their officials in Edinburgh, in St Andrews House and Victoria Quay rush out policy they failed to properly consult on. It's become just another example of a policy created here in Edinburgh which fails to meet the needs of the rural and island communities I represent. While I know ministers will keep defending the scheme and their management of it, I hope that at least behind the scenes they'll be humble enough to accept that some serious lessons need to be learned from its failure to deliver what it promised our farmers and crofters.
Thank you, Mr Halcroft-Johnson. Excuse me. I now call on Minister Jim Fairley to respond to the debate. Around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. There's a number of points that were made during that debate there, so there's a couple of things I'm going to say before I actually get into my main notes. We gave farmers the choice to select their own items. There was a farmer in Orkney who gave 7 items entered as a single item claim, and if they'd read the guidance they would have understood that that should have been different item claims, so therefore that was a rejection. Data for the agriculture scheme is not collected by Scottish parliamentary constituency basis, but we can possibly do something on that if that's going to give satisfaction to people to understand what it is that we were doing. We're absolutely we're taking lessons out of the scheme that we've put forward. But what I'm going to say is this: the Scottish Government, in delivering this scheme, delivered a really good thing. The Future Farming Investment Scheme is a good thing. We worked with the industry and stakeholders, and it resulted in an investment of over £21 million supporting 1,750 farmers and crofters across Scotland, supporting them in improving efficiency, productivity, environmental performance of their businesses, and it's an investment that is expected to stimulate over £30 million of economic activity across rural Scotland, benefiting local chains and local rural businesses. So let's get some perspective. The funding was an additional investment, sitting on top of the most generous, non-competitive direct support package for farmers and crofters anywhere in the UK. And I'm proud of this government's record of supporting and investing in our crofting and farming communities. The BPS, the VCS, the LFAS payments, the CAGS payments, the list goes on, all in stark contrast to the car crash policies that have been introduced by the last UK government and continued by the current administration. Direct payments in England are being phased out, falling to a meagre £600 in 26-27. Put simply, things are absolutely better in Scotland. This was a discretionary and highly competitive grant scheme. There was no farmer or crofter was automatically entitled to a grant, and while we identified priority groups, that was not a guarantee of funding, and I've said that before. Applications still had to be eligible, and planned investments had to deliver against the scheme's objectives. Capital investments were assessed on their ability to deliver the scheme's objectives. I'll take Christine Graham in a second. The capital investments were assessed on their ability to deliver the scheme's objectives, improving business efficiency and sustainability, protecting, restoring or enhancing the environment, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating the effects of climate change, as well as delivering wider public good. And investments that performed more strongly across those criteria scored higher than the more general items of farm equipment. I'll take Christine Graham.
Christine Graham.
Yeah, I think it's not in dispute that it's a good idea, but I think one has to appreciate that there have been difficulties in applicants understanding where it went wrong and where it went right. So I'm grateful for it seems the Minister's looking at having some regional data. But what was also useful is to give that example of why an application failed. 7 items should have been broken down into 1 each. I know in the answer of 4th December, Minister, gave some examples to Liam MacArthur of why they were failed. But why not publish these so that the next set of applicants, if there's another scheme, will see the things that do not apply, why those applications failed?
Minister.
So, Christine Graham raised a fair point, but I'm going to touch on a lot of the points that she's made while I go through the rest of my speaking notes, because standard farm equipment may be valuable to an individual business, and in a highly competitive scheme, they don't score nearly as highly as those against the scheme's objectives when compared with other planned investments. And it's also important to correct the claim that fewer than 1 in 10 small farms across were supported. That figure is incorrect, and it arises from confusing the total applications with eligible applications. In reality, around 30% of eligible farm and croft applications were supported. And it's important to be honest about the application quality. Across the scheme, a significant number of verification issues were identified where responses could not be confirmed against rural payments and inspection divisions reckons. 1 second. Or the investments described, or the investments not described clearly enough to be able to support a grant. And I'll take Liam MacArthur.
Liam MacArthur.
I'm very grateful to the Minister. And look, he's putting forward a robust defence, which is what I would expect him to do in these circumstances. I think, though, that the circumstances that Douglas Ross articulated in terms of the failure rate has to give pause for thought about whether or not the funding that was available has been as well targeted as it might have been. And I think the risk in the robustness of the response the Minister has given is it doesn't necessarily give the impression that this is a government reflecting on what went wrong as part of this scheme and therefore gives confidence to the farming community that in terms of future schemes those lessons will indeed be learned. Minister.
Well, I dispute the point that Liam MacArthur has just put to me, because the opening statement I said right at the top is that we are taking all the lessons from this scheme, we're learning from them, and anything else that we do in the future, that will be very much in the forefront of our mind. Very quickly.
Jamie Halcott-Johnson.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Minister. The Cabinet Secretary in the discussions during Stage 2 of the Natural Environment Bill said that there was a review being undertook and it would be published before the Christmas recess. Has that review been published? Is it the update that happens to be on the FFIS website, or are we still waiting for that?
Minister.
The member has clearly read my notes here, because that is literally the next paragraph I'm going on to, because we did publish a detailed assessment document before Christmas, and it sets out clearly how applications were verified, scored and ranked. That material is publicly available, and it provides important context for understanding the outcomes of a highly competitive scheme. Ahead of its publication, I had a very candid discussion with NFUS to highlight the issues identified across applications, including cases where previous capital support had not been declared. So there was a number of areas where people did not put the correct information on their scheme or on their application, and that would be why they were declared ineligible. And it's also important to be clear to clear up the misconception that there were regional disadvantages. The assessment and scoring criteria were applied consistently across Scotland. Yes, I'll take Douglas Ross.
Douglas Ross.
I am grateful to the Minister for taking so many interventions. I was certainly left under the impression at the committee that the Cabinet Secretary felt those applicants who had not been successful should wait for the review and see where they went wrong. Can he confirm or deny that any applicant will be able to look at that review and know why their individual application was not successful? And while during this debate he's been contesting some of the figures, does he confirm that one figure that he's not contesting is the 40% of applications that were ineligible? That's extremely high, and therefore, is that standard with schemes in his department, Or is this an outlier that, again, should have raised alarm bells within the rural affairs sector?
Minister.
As I've just stated, we published the detailed assessment of the documents before Christmas, and folk who have got applications in that were successful or unsuccessful can go into that and they can measure that against their own. And in terms of the numbers, I can't say for certain what the number was in terms of failed applications. What I know is there was a lot of failed applications because people did not put the correct information in, for a number of different reasons, and that goes across all the sectors. Jamie Halcrow-Johnson wants to take another intervention. Am I going to get the time back,
yes,
Presiding Officer?
Jamie Hodgson.
I am grateful to the Minister, as others have said. Can I just clarify, all of those applications that were rejected, will the Minister confirm that every single one of them will have been rejected, having had some sort of human oversight?
Minister.
You're asking me a question about the technical details of how those each individual... Well, I can't give you an answer to that tonight because I don't know who was sitting behind the desk actually looking at them. So I can't give you an answer to that. So it's important to clear up the misconception about the regional disadvantages. What made the difference was not location, but it was the type of investment proposed and how strongly it delivered against the scheme's core objectives. In Orkney, for example, around 30% of eligible applications were supported, compared with the national average of around 40%. Now, the same approach applied in Shetland, and all applications were assessed on exactly the same basis, using the same scoring criteria, and the outcomes reflected the strength of the planned investment rather than the geographical location. It's also worth putting comparisons in context, because Orkney farmers and crofters account for around 4% of the 2025 SAF applications. Comparing the number of wards in Orkney directly with Scotland as a whole, without reference to application volumes or eligibility, it risks drawing misleading conclusions. So, taken to its logical conclusion, that approach would suggest that underlying distribution of farming business in itself is unfair, and it is plainly not. So I recognise, and I genuinely do recognise, the disappointment felt by those who are not successful, and we are absolutely listening very carefully to the concerns that have been raised. We will work with the sector to ensure that if future funds are delivered, they are more targeted and that limited funding is directed where it delivers the greatest impact. But I do recall one particular conversation with a young farmer who quietly pointed out to me that despite not personally having been successful, that the scheme and the investment had been a positive development. There's also need for the industry leadership when it comes to competitive grant schemes such as the FFIS. Put simply, because you can apply for support does not necessarily mean that you should. And I think that's something that members right across the chamber should possibly reflect on. So in concluding, Presiding Officer, this scheme delivered significant investment into rural Scotland. It was delivered at pace with a streamlined application process in response to the long-standing calls for us to reduce administrative burden, and the lessons learned will directly inform what comes next, because this government is committed to supporting and investing in our hard-working farmers and crofters, and it is what we will continue to do in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting.